Hello and welcome to the Free Associates. That's right, folks, the Free Associates, the freedom to associate, with like any idea or anything that just comes our way, just for the nature of discourse and the nature of moving on and kind of creating stuff and inventing stuff, really. And also the ability to like free associate, just kind of like relax your mind and let it wander and just kind of like see shapes and be like, oh, that really looks like the teddy bear I had as a child, and Rocky has a teddy bear. And in fact, I hadn't thought about Rocky's teddy bear so much like my teddy bear, but I'm worried about Rocky's teddy bear because he loves it so much. I'm worried he's going to just choke it to death like Lenny did that puppy in Of Mice and Men. I mean, I'm talking like that kind of free association. It can get very dark. Free association can get dark, but in dark times, we try to match it. Now, we are in a reboot. Oh my God, I got to reboot myself. Holy smokes, people. We're in a reboot. Why is that hard? Reboot mode. We're going to reboot the show. We have been through the belly of the beast with like some 32 predictions from Politico, but we're moving past predictions, folks. We're moving past acrimony and blame. We are bringing up the card of death, the gold card of death, and we will be hypnotizing Waylon shortly. Oh, Waylon. Oh, buddy. Oh, and there you go, Waylon. You are now my free associate slave. Okay, and you will agree with me, and you will do what I asked you to do for once in your life. All right, Waylon is successfully hypnotized. Now, you might be looking at us on Facebook Live, and you might be wondering, who are these guys? Like, we don't need these guys. Or you might listen to us on WMUA Amherst, because even though the station is closed, we are, through the greatness of Dan Ferrara, are allowed to post shows remotely. And so we've been doing that show and trying to keep the airwaves alive there at UMass Radio, which we love UMass Radio. I have to say, one of the couple of things that I want to do is go back, teach, go back, play racquetball, and go back to WMUA and sit in that studio. Waylon, did you know that they were going to move that studio this year?
Where were they going to move it to?
Well, you know all that construction that's been going on?
Yeah.
That's the new campus center that they're building. Ooh. Right? Or it's like some kind of student union, big student union thing, project. And so they're going to move the radio station there.
That makes sense. I mean, the student union has been hurting. I mean, it has this nostalgic feeling for the culture of the campus and everything, but that thing is old.
Well, I was thinking it might be cool. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I almost envision like a DJ booth that people can look into, like when they're passing down the hallway.
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea if that's the case. I love that thing and Do the Right Thing. You remember We Love Radio and Do the Right Thing?
Yeah.
Where the guy's like in a storefront. He's got like a storefront radio station.
Everybody chill.
Oh, it's so good. It's such a great film. Now, Waylon has been kicking and screaming, and I don't blame him. But listen, Waylon, here's the thing.
Yeah, what's up?
Explain what happened, and I'll explain why I did it that way, okay?
Oh, okay. So this is what I call the Cody ambush here. So we've been talking about, back and forth, text and casual conversations about changing the format of the show and what we want to see for the future. We've kind of done this whole analytical thing. So, okay, sweet. Let's think about ways to brainstorm. Then we have like a radio silence where we both shut ourselves in this like COVID isolation. Cut to about an hour before the show, and Cody casually goes, "Oh yeah, I'm thinking, we retool the thing that we're gonna do with the show, and we're gonna rebuild, and we're going to do it like the cult show. We've done a couple of shows where we've kind of like made a cult, and so I'm doing 100 different things, and all I see is like about an hour before, 30 minutes before this show starts, is a text that comes through from Cody that goes, so we're going to scrap everything and start a cult." And that's basically the premise I was going off of about 30 minutes before this show actually started.
Yeah.
Whole live to all of our friends and family and everything.
That's it. I mean, the time has come. Well, we're not actually doing that, but I do think that one of our most successful shows was when you and I basically tried to build a cult over a couple of hours. Now, here's the thing. I think we did what we were doing. It made a lot of sense. No, wait, actually, let me back up for a second. The reason I did it this way is a couple of things. You're best when you're improvising.
I would say 100% correct. Yes.
Okay. So I know how to handle my talent. Okay. And with you, the more like I keep the flame under your feet, you're like a dancing bear. I got to keep the fire under your feet. So you'll keep moving.
Well,
So there's
yeah.
that.
The other
There's
component that I didn't talk about, which is the technical things that Norm wanted to change about 10 minutes
that.
before the show started. But we're not talking about that. We're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
the
yeah.
philosophical path
Yeah,
in which the show
I
is going.
perhaps pushed it too far. But here's the other thing, Waylon, and that we need to talk about is I find it hard to pin you down to talk about these things. Like this is
True.
not your strength. You do
Oh,
not
true.
want to like. That's not what you do. You're really an Action Jackson guy.
Yeah,
You're
I
Action
would. I,
Jackson.
I would
So
definitely give you that.
all right, so then you acknowledge that I know what I'm doing. I think I do. I know you fairly well. I haven't known you as long as most people, but I understand you pretty well. And so, in some ways, we could do a couple of things today. Now, we have the great privilege of not being kind of like that well known ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
we
we're
could
not
we could start a show about daycares or something and make this a children's show, and people would be like, oh, okay, whatever. Those
yeah,
two
we
guys
would
are talking to each other again.
suddenly catch on as a daycare experts or something like that. That would be, you got to be careful what you wish for. But we don't have too many people listening or watching right now, and that gives us the range to talk about things. So now here's a couple of things that we could do. I had an idea of something we could, oh, and I'm sorry, I apologize. Listen, here's the thing. I felt like at the end, and let's just be honest, at the end of the COVID series, I felt like you and I were kind of sitting across the table from one another a little bit. Not like in a really acrimonious way, but like our positions were starting to kind of get settled. And I personally don't like that.
Yeah, I also think that there's no community in in analysis, if that makes sense. Like we
Yeah.
can agree
Yeah.
with each other's ideas, but the thing when we're actually like the cult show, when we were kind of having these ideations of what that looked like, we were building on each other's thoughts and ideas. So it was more of like, I don't know. It kind of felt like an undergrad class where you're like where you're kind
Mhm.
of like sitting there and analyzing all these thoughts in a particular, um, anxiety ridden time. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is what we do best. I mean, we're idea guys.
We're
Snowball
idea guys.
ideas.
We're not like heavy idea guys.
Yeah,
We're kind
no.
of like light idea
Yeah, for
guys.
sure. There's no ideas that are actually come to fruition, but we could throw them out
We're
there.
we're like the natty light of ideas. We're
Bushlight,
not
come
like, okay, well, I was thinking even lighter, but whatever. I know Bush Light's your drink. So I think that's right. I think we're best as collaborators. And I do think that in a way, the whole COVID thing's hard because it's just like, well, we want what we want. And so our perspectives are attached to it a little bit. So we're going to move forward. Now, a couple of things we could do, Waylon, and I'm going to
Let's
throw it
see it.
at you.
Snowball it.
I think, okay, a couple of things we could do today. One thing is we could design the radio show. We could kind of use our brain power to design what a radio show could look like that might be different from what we've been doing or different from like what anyone's been doing. Or we can build up to that and do that maybe next week. And instead today look at how we think school could reopen most effectively next year.
Yeah, I think that we should do both. I think that the untold things that we do in this episode will build the way that the format is going to go. If that makes
Okay.
sense. Let's just jump right into the education.
Okay, cool. So in terms of setting the scene here, you and I both know that there's already a lot of discussion about designing next year. And I guess a little surprising to me, and I would imagine you as well, it's like next year is going to be really different. I kind of thought we'd be back in school in June. So I'm just not really understanding what's going on so well. So we're being told that school is going to have to be really different. Now, we don't have to go into what they're telling us school is going to be because we don't need to do that. But I think we need to accept, you and I, that perhaps like only half the students can be in the school at any one time. Let's lay the groundwork down, okay,
Okay.
for our reimagining.
Okay.
Half. Okay, you go ahead, Waylon.
No,
What's the
I'll
groundwork?
keep tabs of them. So
Okay,
half population at a time.
no more than 13 students in a classic classroom,
Okay.
right?
Student count. Yep.
No sharing of like equipment,
Yep.
particularly, right?
Sure. So my cameras, for
Um,
instance.
Yep. Perhaps no congregated eating,
Yep.
right? Although
Cafeteria is
kids
different.
have to eat. And then I was thinking also in terms of passing time, like students are seated, of course, they're seated 6 feet. We've already kind of covered that because the classrooms aren't going to be that full.
Yeah.
They're seated away from each other, but they can't congregate either. I think that's actually a big one. How can they congregate? Because teenagers really like to congregate. So that's one of my great fears is I'm going to be like 6 feet apart all year next year. It's going to be the new cell phone. I finally conquered cell phones with a cell phone caddy, and now it's going to
the
be.
caddy daddy becomes the Sultan of 6 feet.
Oh,
he
and
is the Sultan. He is the Sultan of 6 feet.
I love it. And also, by the way, it could be the kind of thing where like, hey, listen, if we have to be 6 feet apart, I get to have my cell phone on my desk. Like I can totally see.
Yeah.
What would I say? I'd be like, okay, I guess so. If you're 6 feet apart, hopefully none of our students actually watch or listen to us because then they have an in on this.
They have
Is there anything I'm missing there in terms of like the one other thing? Go ahead. Well, one other thing is like if you have siblings in the school district, that is to say, like if you have one kid in high school, one kid in middle school, one kid in elementary school, is something considered synchronicity. Family synchronicity is something you have to consider.
Yep. The other thing is what happens when a student comes down with COVID. So what are the precautions taken? What happens there? I think on the books they've been discussing closing for an indeterminate amount of time. So what happens there?
Right. I've heard that. Yeah, but we don't have to go with what they're talking about.
Yeah. No, we're setting the scene right now. We're
setting the scene. And perhaps other things will kind of pop up to us. But in the meantime, this is the kind of like the reality that we're looking at. And I think you and I both want, well, let's talk about it. What I want out of next year is as much real time with the students as possible and as little online learning as possible. So my goal, at least in designing this, would be how can we utilize what resources we have to have meaningful in-person instruction next year? And then also, I guess, a separate conversation is how do we effectively design to match that in-person experience with online experience? Like that might be a whole separate conversation, because I accept that that's a reality, perhaps. What about you? What's your goal in designing that?
Yeah, I think maximizing the time spent with each other. I think we've already talked about it, but there's something that really kind of on the teacher front demoralizing. Talking to just blank screens on Zoom is just, it's maddening. But also in the engagement factor for students, it's just, I think that you need that in person, the nuances of the intellectual ongoings and the interpersonal relationships that you build and all of that stuff. Even if it's at 6 feet, you can see my facial expressions and everything, so you can go from there. The other things that I want to happen is for especially on the faculty side, to have a little bit of unity and harmony in the way that we approach everything. So it's not just kind of slapped together, and totally understandable how it's slapped together right now. But I hope that there's a little bit more coherency in our initiatives that we go forward. And then the other part of this is to come to some sort of general consensus about when the new normal, as it's been called, starts, and when we can, and being in tuned with the communications thereof for everybody involved, so we can try to get back to something soon.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Waylon. Can we possibly know that? Like, I'm like genuinely, I'm not challenging you. I'm genuinely wondering. Like, can we put a date on that until, for example, like a vaccine shows up, or we decide to go with herd immunity, or something like that? Is that possible? What you're asking for?
Well, it's not necessarily we're doing that on the district side, but everything what happens is everything gets superseded by by state kind of directives. And you've seen that Baker came out with his plan in Massachusetts, at least, that there's 4 phases. So there's the initial like kind of save our tails right now and just put the Band-Aid on. Then the next phase is going to be an opening of certain industries. The next phase is a limited opening of hospitality industries, and then the new normal. So I don't know if if we should be putting our energy into designing all of that, but we should be having a say and be analyzing it as it's going forward and communicating to the right authorities about when to open it. If that makes
Yeah, yeah,
sense.
totally. And I saw that and I was a little confused about by that fourth. It felt like the fourth stage was basically like, we'll let you know, like
Well,
it had
yeah.
a, like, this is like now fourth stage equals unknown.
Yeah.
So we're
I mean,
not
even
really
first stage, businesses are like, can we open? And he's like, well, I'll let you know Monday. So um, we still need a little bit more directive and clarity. But I understand that it's hard because we have no idea when this is going to end. Whether there's going to be it's going to end at winter, or there's going to be another mutation and things like that. But hopefully. Hopefully we can get back to, I mean, to something where we can have those interpersonal relationships. And the other part is that learning doesn't necessarily just happen in the classroom. There's other means of learning just from society, and just the limitations on gatherings of any sort is going to be a limitation on the educational opportunities for students. So for instance, if
yes.
there's a movie showing or a documentary, I tell my students all the time, like, the green room's having a showing of this movie, you should go see it, or things like that. Students are showing their work exhibits in Forbes Library in Northampton, for instance. So there's other things too. So
Well,
hopefully
Waylon,
there's like,
I mean, I think you bring up a really good point because, if you include everything in that, like sports and stuff like that,
oh yeah,
like that might be something we should look at moving down the road. I mean, there's just so much that you could really look at. I mean, I like to think of it as what we talked about before, is like defragging the hard drive. We're kind of defragging the hard drive a little bit, but we're not doing it in a utopian way right now. Although we could do episodes that are like really reimagining things, but right now we're trying to defrag this hard drive so that it can even work next year. So your point is really well taken. I mean, people get so much from sports, so we want to try to keep that on the table. By the way, I appreciated. I got an email this morning from Provost that was from Narkowitz, that everyone got, that basically was saying now you have to wear face masks, kind of like when you're in public, basically. Like before, it was a little bit more loose. Now it's like all the time. Now, my first reaction was like, uh, I mean, I was really disappointed, but it did go on to explain what it was thinking, and I appreciated that. And what the email said is, as we transition back into non-essential businesses being open, we have to be that much more careful about getting used to the face mask and stuff like that. So, as teachers, we know that kind of logic, that there's a certain kind of logic that happens when you're trying to train people to go into a new situation. So I like that, at least.
yeah. I think that generally speaking, we've seen a lot of responsiveness from our leadership, which is nice. Um,
Yeah, and
but
explanation.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so here's my question though. Okay, let's get. So now that we've set the stage,
Yep.
where,
State.
where, what is the ideal situation? We've gone over our ideal cults. Okay, we've
Yeah.
done that. What is your ideal situation for going? September happens. Boom, we're in. What what hopefully will happen?
Well, you mean aside from like actually, because we've set the groundwork that things will be different. So my ideal situation is that everything was like it was last September. But my ideal situation is that I'm seeing the kids 60% of the time of what I was before. Okay. I feel like that's a number I can live with. And that time is really rich and meaningful. And then the other stuff that they have to do, it's almost like stacked learning, or what do they call it? Where you like
Scaffolding?
you do, well, it's not scaffolding. It's kind of like when you like listen to the lecture at home and then come in and have the meaningful conversation.
Oh, flipped classroom.
Flipped classroom.
Yeah.
Now that's me as a teacher. Now, how do we get to the point safely where we can have those students in the building, and when they're in our classes, it's like all the good stuff. It's all the good stuff. There's no extraneous nonsense. Now I'll give you an example. One thing I suggested is any quizzes or tests that kids have to take should be in the library with a proctor who's just a proctor all day. Like that's all they do. I don't want to spend time in my class giving quizzes, because I don't want to lose that time that I'm going to have with the students to have discussions and other stuff. So that's, for example,
Yeah.
a
I think that would
thought.
be hard to manage, but Yeah.
Well, why would it be hard to manage? You have
Because then you have a medium in between. Okay, this is what their quiz is. If all of a sudden you don't have enough prints of it, it gets a little messy there, I think.
It might, but listen, I want to be yes and a little bit with this. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's doable. You would agree that that's a doable idea, and you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah,
I think that
for
you're
sure.
probably a little bit more electronic in your quizzes and
I
tests
think
than
that
I.
that's where that's essentially so the flipped classroom for me at least is that we give the assignment. So that flipped part is that the exams or those summative assessments are at home, and you can tool them to be pretty difficult. I mean, what I do is I have my multiple choice. There's 6 answers. They shuffle all, and the answers of it shuffle. So I tell the students right after they take it, I'm like, you all can take it again and you can talk to each other to get the right answers, because you need to physically communicate to the next person whatever the answer is. Because you can't go 12C, 13A. You need to be like, what is the control for aperture? Oh, it's f-stop. And you need to say it out loud and communicate that to people.
But
So I think that we need to
can't they look
revision the
online?
exams and everything that we do.
I guess so. I would have to say what you're talking about would be hard for me. That would be hard for me to pull off, and I feel like eyes would be over my shoulder on that. So, but I'm totally willing to look at how to make like that kind of
Yeah.
like quizzes better or more effective. I'm not closed off to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be in some ways great. I would love it to find a way to really assess them, because in history there is certain things like terms that you really want to make sure that they know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that is, so we're talking about the ideal situation and everything, and I'm trying to think of some of the things that could potentially be refreshing in this. Um, if my class, one thing that I think that it would be ideal is that we set the expectations to not be we're necessarily covering the same amount of things with the same, because you have, if we have A B days where we have half of the students of a class and half in another, you're not going to have the same amount of time. So rethinking where the condensed version of your curriculum and everything, but in doing so, if I can't even imagine having a class of, now you don't want 6 kids in your class, but somewhere in the 12 to 15 student range. I've never had an intro class, a video class, which I actually could dedicate time in the same way of 15 kids than 30 kids. Like
Yeah.
I've never experienced that. You need a threshold of a certain minimum for
Mhm.
any vibrant discussion and things like that. But the idea that I might be able to have 15 kids in my class, or 13 or 14 or 12, is something where I can give targeted individual time in a way that I weren't necessarily able to before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's interesting, and that would work for some and not for others. I have to say, I don't like classes of 17 or under. In fact, I don't like classes of 21 or under. Last spring, I had tiny classes because for me, it's almost the opposite. I want them to do simulations, and I need enough players on the field. And, I know that you do too in your own way. And I'm very wary of small class sizes. I've experienced both. And for what I do, for the kind of teacher I am, I like a big class size. Now, what you're talking about makes sense for one-on-one, like, well, this is how you bring in the aperture open and stuff like that, or whatever it is
Yeah.
that you do. Now, Waylon, I'm going to have to hypnotize you again, and I'm going to
Ooh,
force you to put
wow.
on the music. Now, this has been part one. Part one. There you go. You're hypnotized. This is part one of a long series about how to reintegrate with the next year. Okay. And we're going to be kind of these are like drive-bys. We're just going to be going fast, and we're going to be going furious, and we're going to be doing these short, like 25-minute to half an hour episodes, but we're going to build on them, which is cool. This is really exciting to me. It's the idea that we're going to have a series, and then we're going to build our cult, and then we're going to build our political party, and then we're going to reimagine. Yes, political party, Waylon, it's coming.
We'll
It's
take over
coming.
the world.
Prepare yourself. So, folks, if you're listening to WMUA Amherst, then we are on every day at noon. If you're on Facebook Live, we're just going to have a little music, and then we're going to come back in a couple of minutes and start part 2 of this conversation. So we will either see you tomorrow on WMUA Amherst, or we'll see you in a couple of minutes on Facebook Live.